Hello, everybody. We're waiting for everyone to log in, and we're going to give you a few seconds to get settled, and then we will be soon starting today's webinar. Just a few more seconds as people join. In case I don't want to keep you waiting, so I think we're ready to go. Hello, everybody. We have over 300 guests from 45 countries joining us today for our in-session talk, Can Design Activate a Sense of Agency Towards Others? Before I introduce you to Rob and Anna, please allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. As you've probably noticed, today's webinar is being recorded. You will be able to share a link to the recording after the event. We also invite you to ask questions by using the Q&A button on your Zoom. We aim to have a very interactive session today, and we will introduce polls during the talk, and you will be able to submit your answers online. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rob Phillips and Anna Meroni. I'm going to hand you over to Rob, who is going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's a great pleasure to meet you all. Like I said, we've got people from 45 nationalities, which is pretty amazing to be part of this conversation. We'd really welcome your questions. Please put them in the Q&A. And just to be clear about the question that we're sort of putting across, which is, can we dream about acting for sustainability and societal change? Can we inspire, catalyze, or support in people a sense of agency towards others, providing for post-human and non-human assets, leading to proactively questioning how we should implement and what best practice is for do nothing for us without us? And I think that's something that's really, really critical. When we start to talk about agency, it's about giving people choice. When we start to talk about sustainability, it's not just about designing things that are expensive, it's about offering and proposing people to make choices and dictate their choices of also things that impact them. That's part of a conversation. Unfortunately, the way design works, we're not always able to put those people in that position. So it's absolutely fantastic to be part of this discussion with Anna. There is a really interesting resonance in the conversations that we've had, and we really look forward to kind of sharing our perspectives within this field. And so we're going to be trying to share links of projects that we have. Our first question that we're sort of starting to ask, which is how we see design. And I think this is a really important question, because quite often when I talk to people of completely different disciplines, backgrounds, actually what is design as a principle, how it enacts, how it works, what's arts practice, how these things function. I think it's really critical that we start defining those and kind of starting, because it's all about context, cultural backgrounds, locations, and they're all going to be different. All of our definitions and approaches are going to be different, which is absolutely fine. But sometimes by bridging those two conversations, we can go, oh, you see it like that, we see it like this. And I think it's important to see these things from a kind of a connected point. So Anna, if you wouldn't mind starting off with that question. We're also going to be starting to share links that hopefully come through the chat. They might either be through Joe or through us as we're doing it, and we can share them as we go. So over to you, Anna.
Hello, thank you. It's also my pleasure being here. Rob, was a nice opportunity to get to know each other, this conversation. So very grateful for the situation. I will try to do the same as Rob. I'm not sure I'm going to be so quick and effective in also sharing other links and connection to what we mentioned over our conversation, but let's try to do it. Rob, so shall I start? All right. So we decided to start our conversation by really try to see how we see design. I mean, it's probably the biggest question ever, but let's start to move at least from our own small, very tiny experience. So I have to say that it's been a long time. I'm working with the so-called design for social innovation, and so basically it's a design concern with a kind of interest, which is not only the one of the individual or a specific community, but it's a little bit wider. It's a kind of public interest. And I would like to start this conversation with not defining at all this kind of design, but with a critique of, including self-critique of the way in which we are approaching, in particular, this kind of design that aims to have an impact, let's say, to make people change, to make people considering also others, people, other environments, and whatever. And my critique is on two main issues. The first one is concerned with ideas. I think that we are a little bit giving up with having ideas, if I may say. In particular, in social design, we have lost the sense and the ability to deal with the power of images, the power of visions, the power of aesthetics also, of gesture, of rituals, in particular in social design. We gave up in a way to an idea of aesthetic quality to focus on mere measurable performance indicators of what we do. And I think this is a pity, and most of all, we are not doing our job. Because after all, our job is also crafting a little bit the future, and most of all, making this future be dreamt. So making people dream about something that is not yet there, is not yet available. And what more than a common interest, the shared value, the so-called commons to be focused on? We really need to make people dream about caring for the commons, caring for the others. And so I would like to start with this first point that maybe can also be part of the conversation. The second point, and that's just, let's say, the beginning of the story, is it's a consequence of the first one. So basically, I think we are entering a little bit into a kind of tautological dimension of design. Tautology basically is repeating what we already know. And so we feel confident in doing what we already know, and we are not brave enough to explore new possibilities. And very often, what happens when we work with social design is to be extremely conservative, not to be brave enough to think out of the box, to work with the motions, to work with suggestions. So I like very much to quote Gregory Bateson, that maybe for some of you is known, that used to say tautology is a behavior that brings to extinction of a species. If you don't make mistakes, if you don't introduce unintentional changes in a system, the risk is you don't actually evolve, don't actually learn. And so this is the problem. And so the second point is participation, and I'm finishing, because there is a lot of talk about participation. There is a lot of course, recognition of the importance of any kind of participatory practice when we speak about this kind of design. But the way in which we are making participation is very often a kind of mechanical way. We are not actually open to suggestions, to real suggestions that go beyond what we expect to come from this kind of participatory activities. And And so let's say we use it as a kind of fake ritual in which most of all, in which we are not, we haven't understood how to balance what I put on the one side, which is authorship, and on the other side, which is curatorship, which is a kind of pole of postures and attitude that we have to take when we deal with participation. And so that's it. This is how I see design when we deal with this.
I think I'm just going to build on that, because I think it is really important. I think there's, and I'm going to drop in some examples to the chat as we go, just to contextualize it, because I think everybody thinks, well, it's an assumption, but a lot of people frame design as a silver bullet, and it's not. It's not going to, you know, slay everything. It's not going to solve every single problem in the world. So I'm just going to raise some kind of how I see it as a process. So first one project was My Nature Watch, which was a DIY open source camera we designed in collaboration with the Northumbria Interaction Research Studio. And it was a beautiful process, because actually I didn't realize it then. But my colleague, Professor Bill Gaver, was just like, let's not set a caveat on what people can and can't do, and let's see how they come back to us. And it led them to rewild gardens and do a whole host of things. And it's almost serendipitous accidents that wouldn't have happened unless we'd have let them. So, but it's hard. There were failures because we kind of open things up so much. A constant inspiration of mine is, and it's a really interesting project, which is Detroit Soup. So it's this amazing program that runs in the States. Basically what happens is it's a process of crowdfunding. So you go, you pay for a bowl of soup, $3, $3 to $5 on the door. You have some nice food. You listen to a series of talks the other end where people are going, oh, this is the type of projects we want to do. The lead speaker then gets all of the door money to go and do that project. Then 3 months later, they come and tell you what they've done with that money. So this kind of organic process of sometimes people make small businesses, sometimes people make startups, sometimes they just do something for the local school, but it's the way that it's voted for and by people, which is super good. It's really, really interesting. I think, you know, a couple of other interesting examples that sort of sit outside of design, well, inside. One is the Sheffield Wheat Experiment, a really beautiful project I came to recently, where people, because of COVID, they were starting to think about actually how we're growing heritage varieties. And it's really, when you start to look at almost like micro farming, how we can build those things together, these things start to become really, really interesting, because they're not sort of secured or dictated by us. What you're doing is you're designing a process. The last one is the Nashulai. It's on the Masai Mara, their open conservation project. It's one of the first sort of community-owned conservation projects within Africa where there's sort of complete autonomy. It's pretty amazing. I think, again, it's kind of, what does agency look like? And it's something that I sort of discuss and bring about in my book, Future Kind, which is really actually, most of the time people want to make good decisions. So how do we design in processes and interactions that enable people to make more informed decisions? And I think that's something that starts to become quite interesting, because quite often sustainability and sustainable practice is seen as a bolt-on. It's like, you know, people always ask me at the college, why don't you just do design for sustainability? Sorry, that was a terrible accent. The main reason is that it's because it's everything. It's not its own discipline. It is everything that we do, which I think is really, really critical. So how we see design, or how I see design as well, is, you know, the technicalities, the processes, the technologies, that's just a fundamental. How I see design is actually how people are going to respond to it, the agency it brings, how people take a sense of ownership. And that's really, you know, everyone talks about this word. It was really interesting, and I'm sorry to bring it up, Anna. This word impact. So how we talk about impact in academia, and it's actually there's an interesting handover when you're doing projects, when you're creating something and you're giving people agency to do something, and they change it and make it better because they're seeing it and doing it in their own light. That stuff's really hard to do. It's really challenging, and it doesn't always work out how you want it to. So actually it's quite brave to do that type of work. And I think that's why sometimes this kind of formulaic, oh, but we've just got to do this, or we've just got to do this because it's safe. And, you know, within the academic world, we get funding. And so we're gonna put a question to you, and my colleague Joe in the digital back burner is going to put a poll on, and we would just like you to answer this sort of question. I think you're allowed 2 answers, which are, what are the most pressing and urgent challenges facing social design? It's just a poll. We'll come back to the answers in a minute, but we'll move on to our second question, if that's okay. But please, you know, we're really interested in how you see things, because every design challenge has to start somewhere. It's, you know, it's not a silver bullet. You can't do everything. So you have to choose kind of like where we make that impact. So please register your vote. So our next question is, how can design inspire institutions, entrepreneurs, and people to act concurrently for the common good and social impact? And I think, to contextualize, for me, there's the academic version of impact, of kind of like how people are delivering power. And Anna, I'm sorry you're smiling. If you're new to academia, it's basically how projects are valued. I think for me, impact is more about, if somebody else that you don't know is describing your project or your work, that's impact, because that's pretty powerful. And it might be a narrative of, oh yeah, my granddad now does this, my dad now does this. That's really powerful. So that's just to contextualize. But Anna, what's your thoughts on that question?
Well, first of all, I absolutely love the way in which you define the academic definition of impact. Anyway, I would like to instead to work with emotions and the cultural transformation. So the impact that in a way is similar to what you mentioned. If someone mention my work, that's impact, and that's also part of a cultural transformation. I am putting in the chat a beautiful performance of Ludovico Einaudi, which is a pretty well-known Italian musician, that if you once you have time, you can look at this incredible performance that he was playing piano in the Arctic with the icebergs collapsing around him. And this is a way really to understand what does it mean climate change from the belly, from the bottom, from the emotions. And so I would like us as designer to be able to work with this kind of cultural impact, completely similar, let's say, situation. It's an artist that I like very much, and I think she's pretty well known as well, which is Marina Abramovic. And I was lucky enough in 2010 to be in New York and to be part of the audience of this incredible performance she did for several months. And the title was The Artist is Present, and she was simply sitting in an empty space, waiting for people to sit in front of her and looking in each other's eyes for a while. And that was really a way to touch the heart of people. And it was such an emotional moment and a profound moment of compassion and empathy for the others. So I think that the artistic processes, which are not design processes, but we must take part of that kind of approach in our approach, are something that can lead to great transformation. As a last example that I decided to take from art, because in a way I would like not to be too tautological, as I said in the beginning, is the work of Sebastião Salgado. Sebastião Salgado is a super known, let me see if I can put it in the chat, super known photographer. I guess super well known for the beautiful pictures taken in an entire life in the most diverse situation across the planet, and are pictures about the nature, but also about the people. And at the end of a more than 20 years long journey, he decided with the wife to set up a foundation to save an entire area of Brazil in the Minas Gerais, and to turn this area that was deteriorated into a beautiful forest again. So planting trees in a connection with the citizens, with the kids in the area, with the public administration. And so he really started from the emotion of the nature to make it happen for real. So not design, strictly design examples, but something that was really impacting in the culture, in my opinion, at least.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we design outside of design. I mean, it's like, an inspiration that is really, really critical and important is kind of, one book I've just shared in the chat, which is really, so John Alexander looking towards actually what does it mean to be a citizen? And I think these values are pretty critical as soon as we start to go, actually, design is just a means to do something. When we look at what citizenship is, within all its forms, these things start to become, totally different. I mean, so like one of my favorite groups that hopefully I would be able to visit one day is the Vertical University. It started out in Bhutan, and it's a really interesting group because what they were doing is they were seeing that all of the younger people in the area were leaving to go to the city because there were better jobs, it was more prosperous. And the problem is that knowledge was just becoming lost. So they started to go, actually, how can we create an institution that can empower people, empower growth, share ecological values and processes? And so they were sort of, from a systemic point of view, they were starting to do things that were really, really interesting. And they're definitely something to keep an eye on. I mean, one of my other favorites is the Derby Museum of Making. So they've got a really interesting approach to how they're looking at things in the north of the UK. Is really what is making, how we can use it, how we can build on it, how we can empower people, how we can grow. They've got an open and active makerspace and residency within what they do. They were built on one of the sort of world's oldest factories, which was their silk mill. They're very aware of the sort of both the positives and the negatives of what those industrial terms did. But they're really interested in kind of like, they have STEM baby connect groups to start to actually think about actually how we're looking at STEM learning with groups of young mums. I think that's pretty amazing and pretty powerful. And I think the other thing is when we start to look at the kind of the moments where things are less considered. So I think, Joe does an amazing process of Joe McLeod in his book of engineering. So how we look at the end of interactions and the end of experiences, so that we're almost, what happens at the end of processes. I think within these things we can look at kind of like, again, I think it's not that we need to reframe what sustainability is known as. And we should just be empowered to be able to make better choices. And I think one group that's really doing that is colleagues down at in Totnes Schumacher College, doing some amazing work, mainly because they're starting to enable people to have a positive conversation about what does it mean to design within an ecology? What does it mean to produce? What are the impacts? And I think quite often people start at the highest level which is really difficult to navigate because these are wicked problems. So you can never have one sole approach to it. It's just impossible. They're totally interconnected. My final, sorry, I'm chucking lots of links at you, but it's quite helpful. A book that I think is brilliant. I ask all our students to read it, which is From What Is to What If by Rob Hopkins. And he was the sort of founding father of the transition town movement. And he's got a couple of chapters in it that are just like, actually, how should we be asking questions? How should we be questioning things? How should we be empowering people to do these things? Because I think quite often designers want to, jump to that, oh, well, if we could. And the problem is sometimes the audiences that we're working with are not prepared to kind of see it from that perspective. And it might be as simple as councils are only looking at their funding year and they're going, oh, well, we've got to spend the money in 8 months, or we've got to, rather than going, actually, how can we work with municipalities? How can we work with organizations to start going, well, look, in 5 years' time, we could be here, and then we can work it back. And I think, that's not an institutional challenge, that's a tax challenge, because they're dictated by their financial year. So this is why I think this space is so hard to explore and worthy of going, how should we include people? Because it's dominated by so many other wicked elements that sit around it. I think that's quite often the problem, where people look to designers and go, just do this, can't you just do this? And it's just like, no, because we're quite often we're dominated by systems, processes and services that kind of hit us as well, all at the same time, which is a challenge. I just want to repeat that we'll email all the links that we've got out to you afterwards as a thank you. So we fully appreciate if you can't download them all or things like that. Apologies if it's frustrating. It was my idea to be able to include people in the conversation so they can look at the references and start to see where the conversation is coming from, rather than kind of leaving you out in the cold without knowing what we're talking about. So,
Rob, in the beginning, I posted, apologize for this, I posted the links in the private chat instead of the public one, but now I have understood. Anyway, just to refer to what you said, I just recently discovered a theory which I like very much, and I now recommend, as you do for your students, I recommend everyone to look at, which is the one that comes from anthropology, about the super diversity. And I think this is a concept that very well describes the situation and the society we are living in, which are characterized by super diverse kinds of diversities. So it's not just a diversity of ethnicity, and so a general idea of a cultural diversity, but it's a diversity in the kinds of people of the different communities that populate our cities. And I discovered that there are a number of cities in the planet, and I guess London is one of them, but not Milan, which are so-called majority minorities cities, in which the majority of the population is made up minorities. And so how can we design in such a tricky environment, how we can really deal with all this complexity? And I think that despite all the issues that I mentioned in the beginning with participation, we must develop a very effective ways to participate and to include the others. Otherwise, it's impossible. It's definitely and completely impossible to work in such a context. Just to mention, and it's going to be the only one mention that I'm doing of projects we are doing here. There is one that we started a few years ago in 2018 now in Milan, which is the name is the School of the Neighborhoods, which is in Italiano is the School of La Scuola dei Quartieri, sorry. And it's It's a process, it's a project funded by the municipality with the aim of stimulating social entrepreneurship in the most diverse and in a way somehow fragile neighborhoods of the city, but really counting on all the strength point of the different neighborhoods. So making connection with the neighborhoods, trying to really nurture the culture of the community in order to have new things happening, not only for the benefit of the new businesses, but also for the benefits of the community. And so the projects that you can find, I'm sorry, the website is in Italian, but it's a very local project that is having a certain echo also across the country. Projects are the most diverse. And I cannot speak about best practices. They are the best possible things they are doing, but not best practices. So, I mean, the people are really struggling to do their best. And we are trying to support them in this struggling with a kind of cultural, with a kind of technical support, as you mentioned, but also with a little bit of cultural support, which means creating around these innovators the conditions for them to flourish. So to nurture a culture of diversity, nurture a culture of sympathy and empathy for the diversity. And that's not something that you can measure in 3 months. It's something that probably will take years and ages to happen. So it's something that requires a completely different way to think about the kind of cultural impact we may have, and we actually want to have, because it's about dreaming also. It's not about only counting the things done. So I'm perfect.
Yeah, I think it's a really important one. I mean, our next question that we're going to move on, and I'm going to answer this first, which is what best practices should we undertake so that design approaches centralized communities and kind of puts them in the driving seat, so to speak. And I think these are really critical, important questions. I mean, one of my favorite projects that's done by a grad of ours that is truly inspirational. So In-House Records is a record label that works with inside the penal system, and what it does is it starts to look at basically almost encouraging inmates to throughout their time. Yes, okay, they leave the prison with music that they've created and that is sold and that, but actually they're starting to look at how they build their CVs with them, how they develop their own agency, how they essentially re-network those people, and their reoffending rates are down to something like 1% of everyone who's been involved in that project. It's truly amazing and it's inspiring, and it's doing something that's crazy difficult. I think the hardest thing with this type of work is not everything works everywhere. And I think so often the cultural contexts, the cultural backgrounds, the groups, people, the audiences. So, you know, defining that what is good, what is best practice is really difficult, because actually it might be something very small that in that community is insane to achieve. And so that's why sort of sharing some of these links is not, we're not saying this, when they're not placing them in isolation as a silo. We're starting to go, actually see the bigger picture, and we'll come to the questions, of which there are some that are fantastic, thank you, and very difficult to answer. But I think it's also the tools, and you know, everyone asks like, what is technologies within these processes? And my response would be, well, Public Lab is a perfect example of a really interesting project of mine, that a group, Public Lab. So they were based in the States. What happened is when the Event Horizon oil rig came over and had a BP oil slick, basically BP shut down anybody being able to take photographs of that space. because as a big oil company, they were able to do that. And this was pre-drone. And so what people did, that this tiny group of researchers created literally a digital camera on the end of a helium balloon, and then got Google Earth photographs that they took from the camera. They stitched it together, and they could see like live footage of what was happening with the oil slick on a really, really rudimentary way. It was absolutely genius. And CNN used those pictures to report like very, very quickly. I mean, this is quite a few years ago. So again, this would change again today. But what they're doing is they're creating tools for scientists through open design. So again, they're enabling other people to do things. Are they as good as you know, their peers that crossed 5-6 grand? Potentially not, but are they better than nothing? Yes. Do they allow people to make informed choices? Yes. Is it a good start point? Yes. And so I think, you know, what's really difficult, especially with a lot of these practices, you know, and I always go, what's best practice? Okay. It really depends on the context, the situation, who your gatekeepers are, how you're working with people. One of the hardest things is, we'll do some work, then suddenly as another location, we'll just run away and leave you to it. Why? Because we've done our designy bit. So how we plan for exit before we've started is really hard. These things are really, really difficult. And so now we're going to ask, so Anna's going to respond. And in the meantime, whilst we're doing that, we're going to launch another poll, if that's okay. So Joe, please launch that poll. And Anna, please send your thoughts on best.
Do we have the results of the previous poll or not yet? I haven't seen them.
We'll ask.
We will get it later. I'm tired. I'm super tired. Yes, agree with you fully, 100% that there is no action fits all situation. So that's what we are learning. And we are also learning this in the program that I mentioned. And even because, as I said, that tautology is always the beginning of the end. So we need to change. We need to understand how things are evolving, and things are evolving very, very quickly. I think we can actually make something change and make something happens when we can create a condition of engagement of both individuals and institutions that is for the sake of being engaged, not for a specific, not necessarily for a specific purpose or of a specific purpose. So let's put it like this. I like very much the idea that we do something with pleasure when we like doing that, beyond the actual results of our action. So we take dance lessons for the pleasure of dancing, not to really, not necessarily at least to have to give a performance. So this to me is the soul of change. So making people enter in what a psychologist would define the flow of doing things for the pleasure of doing, because you are so concentrated, so happy to do that, that you simply do it. And this is a special condition that is not only of individuals, but can be also of ecosystems, of institutions. So the motivation can be also the pride of doing things, the self-esteem in doing things. And so this builds a lot of identity. So the idea of participating in an action that is making a change, that is making something, is per se an idea of engagement that is for the life. So how can we make this happen? This is the real question for me. How can we touch so many different people, individual situation, institutions to undertake this kind of journeys, which are not safe very often, and are journeys of risk also. And so this I think is one issue. It was 2008, 2009, just to mention a situation that was in my judgment pretty positive, when we started together with Slow Food, a project in Milan about the creation of short food chain solution and services for the city. So food from the surroundings and from the farmers. And when we started, the idea of having a farmer's market was kind of strange, or was still for few people. Now, after 13 years, 14 years, we have a number of farmers market. We have a number of services of that kind. We have a food policy in place that is really working with this kind of opportunities across the whole food chain. Our way to do it, we took the opportunity of the expo that we hosted in 2015 that was all about food and sustainability. So this was the specific case, and it was the momentum for our system to make this change, or at least to start making this change. So probably a bigger ecosystem should also try to understand which can be the triggers for this transformation. Big events or social changes can trigger much wider transformation if given the opportunity to do things. So probably we also need to understand in each and every context which might be the trigger, which might be the opportunity that can be very tiny, but could actually create a much wider impact on the way of doing certain things. And yeah, that's a case, but that's the best moment of a community when this can happen. You never know if it's going to happen or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so Joe, would you mind just sharing the results of the first poll, please? So I think, and there's some brilliant questions coming in. Thank you all for taking the time to ask very, very challenging questions. I mean, so our sort of last point is, okay, so we're looking at the
results.
Yeah, the results. Okay, so 37% of you said a search for social justice and equity. Brilliant. Distrusting institutions and other people. True. Reconnection with the natural world was 32% as well. Yeah, it's interesting when people talk about, there's only 16% of you, so only 10 of you out of all of you voted for poverty and new poverty. And I think it's a really interesting case, that, because actually, you know, I can't remember who stated it, but I know within the UK, you know, we've been our social backgrounds and we're as divided as we are now during the Victorian period, because we've got super rich and then we've got people who are totally skint. And I think these things are really fundamental, how we enable people, again, to make informed choices to grow. I mean, how we get so many different processes to look into just a work culture, like Saturday jobs for young people just don't exist anymore. So these things, how are we looking? Why? Because from a 14, 15-year-old with a Saturday job means you're getting earning, you're understanding a work ethic, you're able to grow, you're able to, and without being able to do that, it's kind of insane. And so governments have got a lot to answer for things like that, if I'm totally honest. We're just gonna, I don't know, Anna, if you had any thoughts on our first poll, it would be great if you did. Or
I think the results are pretty counter evident in my opinion, because I suppose the social design and whatever the most pressing challenges that design should address are normally in poverty and the most traditional condition of fragility that we recognize. So I'm happy to see that there are other issues that are considered primary. And also some negative ones is trust in institution and other people. I think this is another big challenge of today. I mean, we often see that there is a distrust in democracy in a way. So I don't know in the UK, but so let's say that in Italy we are facing a huge decrease of people voting and participating in whatever arena of the public debate. Sometimes we say, okay, participating in designing, so creating co-designing of collaborative design environments is a way to replace the most traditional ways in which democracy can manifest. Yes and no at the same time, because of course participation through collaborative design is crucial. But it's a responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. So in terms of what to do with the results of this participation, I see also in the questions some of them are connected with this also the ignorance sometimes or the actual impact in the long terms of the initiatives. I think that collaborative design and collaborative practices could be also a way to deal with ignorance, because ignorance is something that has a lot to say. So you may understand what are the questions that a person that ignore a certain situation may have, and so ignorance is something very important to develop a project, in my opinion. So understanding what don't know who don't know something.
Yeah, I think I mean, if we can just launch the poll of the results of poll 2, then we'll start to go through the questions. So what was the most powerful motivations that can drive us to sustainable social change? Social peace and collective well-being, 42%, fantastic. Yeah. That's good. Social identity and sense of belonging, 50%, fantastic. And then also yeah, there's some interesting, must be some interesting groups in the room. I think the one thing, 31%, which will come back to a different question, but financial interest. I think, you know, I often talk to clients and groups about how we're gonna make things and make interventions, but really it's about aligning motivations, which is really hard, which is, you know, how do you make it accessible, an interesting process, and it works. So there's one beautiful project that's been working for a while in Plymouth, and it's called CoSnap. And what they do is they essentially create this little housing, so you're able to put your mobile phone in it, take an image. It's really easy to be active in it, because they're interested in coastal erosion. And they've designed a process in a system so that it works and it functions. Does it have a certain amount of agency? Yeah, it does. But it's kind of, again, you're giving people a challenge. So I'm just, if we go to the questions, and Joe, if you can, you know, if there's anything else or if we missed anything, please flag us. So the first one, and thank you for all of these, they're brilliant. I'm going to start with is Maro, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, which is, what's the difference between agency and a sense of agency? Could a sense of agency be the illusory or not that impactful in long terms? I think it's a really good question. I think, you know, agency is a bit like in equivalent, it's a bit like open design. Okay, so within open design, you can have accessible designs, which you can download and you can construct. Totally open design means that you can take something, you can reappropriate it, and totally for your own choice, you can use those plans however you want or however you choose. So I think sometimes there's this sense, and I do agree with that. I think there's no finite gate. It's a very big question to ask without knowing the context of how you're answering it or how it's going. But I think it's really important. How do you create actual agency? And I think that's through working and how you're creating a conversation with the groups and organizations that you're working with continually, just going, hi, what do you want to see? How have we moved that yardstick? Has that made sense? Has that moved forwards? And I think it's not a kind of, again, it's not a silver bullet to go, now you have agency, right? Yes, you do. Doesn't quite work like that. So I think it's got to be the context of kind of how you're sitting. I don't know, Anna, if you had any thoughts to that question.
Once again, I think that the purpose is, I mean, sometimes even if you, like for voting, if you think how much your single vote can actually change the overall outcome of a votation, you may say, okay, but I don't have actually any power. And I think it's the same with agency. So and that sense of an agency, because what actually will change in the long run, in the long terms, can only be the result of a wider agency. And so the sum of several smaller actual agencies or sense of agency. So I will not consider it illusory, but I would think that even the sense of agency is a part of the actual agency of a community.
Yeah.
So
I think it's, and which I'm going to jump to a next question because we're running out of time. So I do apologize. An anonymous attendee, thank you for asking this question. It says, hasn't design traditionally played a role in maintaining the status quo? Is saying you have included people enough in these times of woeful trust in institutions? How can design challenge embedded power structures? That's really interesting. So a research project that I'm just starting with my colleagues called Ecological Citizens, and more about it will come out very soon because we've got our launch in September in LDF. And basically it's about how can sustainability be part of your choices as a citizen. And I think these things are really, really critical. So I would disagree. I would say that really it's how you choose to use design and how you choose and where to intervene. And one of the biggest problems is that quite often people are going, oh no, but we just want this project. Why? Because we understand it, rather than going, what's a new space, how we can do it. Again, I would turn to our colleagues in Schumacher that have been talking about ecology and design for ecological thinking for a long time. And they're really looking at how economics and other things are coming together to really look at new impacts. I think we have to look, rather than just responding to a status quo, I would think we really need to push what design is and what it's for. And I think it's product service system. It's a touch point now, rather than just a thing. It's how we intervene. You know, if you talk to Dan Saffer, who ex Google, it's micro interactions. It's all these tiny little touch points that link together. So I think, yeah, it depends what you mean by inclusion. If you're giving people free choice, or they're just testing the stuff that you do, that's not participation. That's not agency. They're just doing some work for you. So I think it's important to catalyze that. We have one more question, which was absolutely fantastic, which is by Nere. In a small country, challenges are often magnified and sustainability becomes even more crucial. Is it challenging to explain the importance of sustainability is essential as ensure it's beautiful, thriving future for all? What is your suggestion for small countries? What are the best practices? Wow, big question. Is huge. I think the thing is that the way that we talk about work with our students is it's okay when some things scale. So we talk about, you know, a house scale, a street scale, a town scale, a city scale, but not everything has to. And I think sometimes that's the mistake, that we go, actually, this worked in the States, why won't this work here? This worked in the North Pole, why won't it work in the South Pole? I think it's about understanding cultures, understanding context, understanding situations, and also understanding what is appropriate and how to intervene. When we talk about technology, some of it is IoT, but this pen, that's a technology, right? Someone has gathered ink, someone has put it into a package so that it can be reused to communicate with somebody else. It's still a technology, but neither are right or wrong. They are just appropriate for the situation they're used in. And I think that's what we have to get around, is what is appropriate to deal with these challenges. Anna, what are your thoughts?
Maybe I would answer to the Nair, I don't know, sorry, how to pronounce the name, question with the last question from ID, which is why, how would you translate 0% in emulation as the motivation for change? And I was surprised as well, because emulation is normally a pretty strong driver. Emulation is not only emulating the best, emulating the ideal model. Emulation is really empathy. It moves through empathy in a way. So I feel like illuminated by an example or something that can also drive me to change. And this is in small communities, in small municipalities, and in small territories, we understand that this idea of emulating by kind of adaptation to something into another context is actually working. So there is a lot of mutual learning between municipalities, for instance, and small communities about things that worked in one place and then can be somehow replicated or adapted to another one. So I'm also surprised by the very few, not very few, zero answer for emulation, because I thought it was a powerful driver.
Absolutely. And I'm just, Heidi, thank you. You've just got a question, which is amazing, but do you believe that adapting new tools focusing on impact and systemic level could contribute in building for the societal change? Yeah, I think it's quite often it's about seeing the bits in between. And I think that's what we're doing in this next project, Ecological Citizens. So it's seeing how systems couple together. One of the hardest challenges is really, you know, like if you look at our food infrastructures, it's broken. It's totally broken. How we go, right, okay, we're going to have, you know, fruit grown over here, flown halfway around the world to then be packaged to then come here. It's not, it's really simple. What can you eat locally? You know, and some of the things are, we don't like being told what to do. So we don't like it when people go, just don't eat that. Like if you start to just literally, next time you go shopping, start to go, and I know that's different for everybody, you know, what getting food looks like, but how can you inform your choices to make more of them local and seasonally based? Sometimes it's quite hard, because we're humans, so you'll have dilemmas of, it's a kid's birthday party and they really want that, can we have strawberries out of season? Like these, we're human. I would just say that please don't forget that. We are in the dying minutes of this webinar. So in closing, I would just like to say thank you so much for my colleagues at the RCA who have arranged and put in all the work to recruit and be able to talk and share some of this conversation with you. And thank you, Anna, for sparing your time to talk to me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And again, the people in the background of this institution really help knit us all together. By all means, you'll find on our profiles our email addresses. Please drop us a line if there is anything that we can help follow up. Anna, over to you with any other notes, any other thoughts.
No, I say what you just said. Thank you to those that organizes this, and with great care helped us to put this conversation together also between Rob and me. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Rob and Anna. It was great to have you both on board and sharing your thoughts and insights and expertise to our audience. If you have any additional questions or you would like to connect with us directly, please use the information that you see on this slide, and make sure to check our webpage for upcoming in-session talks. And everybody, thank you for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.